we'll give it another minute or two. I think everybody's joining late. Claire's on her way. All right, there is Claire.
Hiya.
Hello. It looks like I just sent out a note to the mailing list reminding people, and it looks like people are rolling in. So why don't we start at 7:05, and we'll give them another 3 minutes to join. Is the time in everybody else's Google Calendar or ICS calendar wrong? It always says it's going to be like 7 hours from now. Like, I don't know why that is when the rest of the IETF meetings appear correct. But when I look on the interim page, it says right now. So
it looks okay with on my side, but I'm using Microsoft Outlook, so for good or bad.
Well, I'm using Google.
I'm an Outlook person. Mine's fine.
Well, I'm using Google, and it works fine, as I said, for every other meeting. It's only the SATP meeting that is incorrect in my calendar, which I don't get. So.
Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, Paul. As a reminder, we're starting at 7:05 because people are just rolling in.
To Google what the PST time zone is.
You're very quiet, Paul.
Not sure if I can help that.
Is Drummer sleeping near you? Is that the problem?
She is sleeping because it is raining, so there's nothing else to do.
Yeah. For reference, Drummer is Paul's dog.
That makes a lot more sense. I've got 2 of those snoozing next to me as well. So, well, one's snoozing, the other one's staring intently out the window. So, at least she's been quiet. Oh, she's gorgeous. Oh, look at that. Oh, love it.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Had the agenda in front of me a second ago. Essentially, these are the interims are a little bit more laid back in terms of let's just make progress and get things done. One thing that Claire and I were discussing that we'd like to hear first is, Thomas, can you give us a quick update in 5 minutes or less about the design team?
I'm sorry, about which one?
The design team.
Oh, the design team. Okay. Can I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, folks, at the last interim meeting, we decided the group decided to have a subgroup, what is it, a design team that would work specifically on the network identification problem. And so we had our first subgroup call about 2 weeks ago. I think it was same thing on a Tuesday. And I thought it went very well. If anything, we ran out of time because there seems to be multiple problems. But if there's some notes up on the SATP list, but the core sort of 3 requirements coming out of that discussion that Wajia proposed are the following: that a network identifier needs to have at least 2 parts. There's the self-generative part. That's probably not the right word. It's the hash of the genesis block to make sure that even in the case that a DLT has forked, that you're able to identify the correct DLT. And then there's I call it the preamble, which is the front bit, which is the assign bit. Some authority could assign it, IANA, or authority such as an IANA or some kind of a registry. So that's the first requirement. The second requirement is that it needs to be, what was the phrase, self-proving, right? So that when a node, when a machine, an EVM is running inside a particular network, it can run happily just with that second bit, the local identifier, and it can just forget about the preamble, the issued bit. Claire, you have your hands up. Do you wanna correct me?
It wasn't to correct at all. It's a question to ask.
Oh yes, please. Yeah, please. Sorry, I need to look at what did I write on the notes? Okay.
You go read your notes. So apologies, I missed the last call. I was out of the country when we set up the design team. So from what I've heard so far, this is to identify blockchain networks specifically based on the 3 requirements that we've just started talking about.
No. That's the real problem. So what's very clear now is that we need an identification scheme that could also be used by systems that do not use blockchains or DLTs, and I usually call them monolithic systems. And there's thousands of those for people in the finance industry. RTGS system, the real-time gross settlement systems it's bread and butter. Every bank has got 24 of them, kind of.
That was going to be my call out, is that obviously our scope, the charter that we're following, is that we need to make sure that whatever solution we come up with is underlying system agnostic. So thank you for just clarifying that, Thomas. My apologies.
That's right. And so this brings in, so let me stay on the second one here for a moment, Claire. So assuming we have an RTGS monolithic system, that the 2 portions remain true. There's a assign bit, there needs to be, and then the what we call the 16 bytes, the backend bit could in fact be pre-selected by, say, the bank. So the bank could say, okay, I have 10 RTGS systems. And I've got 1 common preamble prefix bit that I've been assigned by whatever, the government, IANA, whoever. I'm going to, use that 16-byte namespace as my namespace to allocate identifier for each of these endpoints within the bank. Right. So there's no DLTs, no blockchains. It's all under control of the organization that sort of owns that number identification. And it's interesting then, because if a bank does own, and by the way, I'm just using a bank as a generic example. If the bank owns several gateways and controls the namespace, then it has the freedom to also assign the numbers to the gateway endpoints. So I think it kind of satisfies it. Yaron, go ahead.
Quick comment and a question. So a comment to what Claire said. I think it's fine if part of the identifier is self-proving or self-verifying for a subset of the networks, for those that are blockchains, and not for others. So So it's a feature, but it's only supported by some networks. And my question is, did you have a discussion about the format, the physical format of the identifier or the representation? There seems to be an assumption that it needs to be a fixed length binary string. I wonder about that myself. Did you discuss it at all?
Not extensively. We got, and correct me for folks who are on the call, we got to realizing that there's at least 2 levels, if not 3 levels of identification. And then there's the question, Yaron, of metadata. And so we started talking about DIDs. It doesn't mean we have to use DIDs, but assuming there is this number already there, whether it's fixed length or it's a TLV, it could be put into a DID data structure with all the other metadata there, or that information could be put into a DID document that's off-chain somewhere, and the DID is just a resolver mechanism for you to fetch that DID document. So we're not there yet, but I mean, I feel we made progress, that we recognize at least 2 levels, if not 3 levels of identifiers and needed.
I believe that the design team does have a knowledge that that is a requirement. We should keep this discussion not to solutionizing that, because that's the purpose of the design team, but at least just reporting out, as well as asking any clarification questions and making sure the design team has those requirements. That's obviously key.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. And so the last bit, the third requirement, was that this question of ownership of of the network. So and there is a significant problem today with blockchains, as Dennis and Wejia pointed out, that if you're a client and you're making an RPC connection, RPC call to a network, you're talking to a node or a thing that claims to be a node in that blockchain, and you won't know whether it's a real node or a fake node until you transmit a dummy transaction and see if it shows up on the main net, on the main blocks, right? And that's kind of inefficient, but there is this question of how do you show legal, ownership. I think it's probably not so much an issue if it's a private network or an enterprise network, but that's kind of the third thing. And I don't know if it's even in scope for us, but any technical mechanism that could help, the legal side, I think would be appreciated. David.
Yeah, my question related to that is, were you proposing a persistent identification or a transient? In other words, do you really want to make a trial operation for each transaction, or at least for each whatever period of time is connected, or is this sort of a one-time transaction to prove that this is a valid node, and then that's that verification is persistent for the remainder of this network connect, or not? I mean, I'm trying to say, is it a transient connection, or is it a persistent? Even if it's not continually pinging, is it once you've been verified, like some sort of a PGP key or something? It's in your database that, okay, this is a valid node forever forward.
Right. So the problem is that if I talk to a node now and later in half an hour, it could be different RPC endpoints, right? You're not talking necessarily to the same node. That's the first problem, David. And the real problem is that we want to include this identifier, the second half, the 16-byte, what we call cross-chain ID, in the transaction. It's mentioned as part of the DLT transaction, and so that bit has to be persistent, right? It's the same network. It hasn't changed. It's just there's 2 different nodes I'm speaking to via RPC that's claiming to be part of that network, right? And by the way, I don't know if this is in scope. I don't think this RPC problem is not in scope for us. But if you have this, hash of Genesis block embedded as part of the identifier, it helps tremendously in reducing this sort of surface of attack for these kind of fake nodes.
Yeah. This probably should be part of this design discussion. But I completely agree. It's just that you can narrow this time window arbitrarily small. So. and say, well, I talked to you a millisecond ago. Do I believe you now? I mean, it's like,
Right. So that's kind of my quick report. Sorry, slightly long report, Wes.
Appreciate it. Did you ever say what the third of your requirements was? Did I miss that?
The ownership of the blocks. It means like legal ownership, basically, when challenged.
Okay, great. All right, sounds good. Claire's up next. Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah,
Can you introduce yourself?
well, firstly, thank you very much, Thomas. It was really good to get an overview. And I understand you've got another session booked in. I have a question that I kind of just wanted to open to the floor. Based on our approved scope from the IETF for the formation of the working group, are we all clear, or do we all have an understanding of what the gap is between where our documents are today and where we want to be before we invite people for peer review? There's been quite a few conversations that, and you mentioned yourself earlier, Thomas, that certain elements are out of scope, and we are dipping into the out of scope elements a bit. And I just want to make sure that we're on track with the core charter first. And get that progressed, because obviously that is our purpose together.
Anyone? I think we are. So you're right, Claire. We're slowly creeping into what we call stage 0.
Yeah,
but
we are.
At least the architecture doc and the SATP core should mention these things. Requirement for SATP core that the endpoints have an identifier, a network identifier, and that's it. maybe reference something else, but that's the end of what SATP core can say, I think.
Yeah, and is that the last thing that SATP core needs to have before we take it to a peer review, guys? Do we think?
Raphael and I are working on version 3 right now.
Yes. Hi, folks.
Hi, Raphael.
We were considering on being a bit more detailed and specific about the session resumption, because that will be a topic where certainly there will be a lot of questions. And once we have the details sorted out and stage 0, I think we'll be in a good position for going to the peer review.
So would everyone on the call agree then that session resumption is the last thing, because obviously identifiers is stage 0, and we said that that's out of scope for our charter, although we do need to acknowledge it. Is session resumption the last thing we need to refine? I don't feel like you have to give a yes or no on the call now. I just want everyone to think about it and hold that question in their heads. Because if it is, then we've achieved a lot in a very short period of time since we've officially been a working group.
So I would argue, what is the complete checklist, right? It would be nice to hear that. Thomas, you opened your mic. Go ahead, and then Rama.
Sorry. I was just saying section 7 in San Francisco. We had this quick discussion where actually you corrected me that there was this idea of what is it, the stage 0, where the gateways are proposing to each other, I'm going to use that cipher, no, I can't use that, I want to use this cipher, back and forth, and so that needs to be fixed also. And I need to ping you privately to remind me your suggestion. There was a good suggestion that you made to fix that. So that's the bit I want to update. Raphael, other than 7.345 and session resumption, is there anything else we need to fix up? Rama?
Rama, I think you're on mute still.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just wanting to clarify about what's the gap. So yeah, I mean, how we identify networks, how we discover networks, I think that is stage 0 out of scope. But uh, can we maybe just describe the properties of a unique identifier without stating how they get created? Like it has to be unique. A gateway has to speak when a gateway speaks for a particular system or a network. We know that we can provide that particular identifier that's going to be persistent across um, uh, until the SAPI protocol is complete. I don't know if that this is explicitly stated in the architecture document or in the SAPI code. So I just wonder if we should just state the properties without going into the details.
Right now, I think both documents, Rama, just say network identifier. We actually don't say what properties it needs to have. In fact, we don't even say how long it's going to be and what format it's going to be.
Should we?
Yeah. I mean, for the architecture, we could add a paragraph or two, and the I don't know if we're allowed to reference a document that's not a working group item, right? Because we could refer to reference wages draft.
So a couple of things. In order to get the protocol done, we can shift the scope around a little bit if there's a requirement for the core or the architecture or whatever that we realize we can't go forward without something. Then that means it has to be a part of it. So if identification, or more specifically, this won't work unless we give it some exact specification, then we can include that as a requirement for getting forward. That being said, I'm not sure personally that this qualifies, not speaking as a chair, but speaking technically, right? If we have a parameter in the protocol that is generic, right? It's some sort of, it's most likely going to be a textual type blob. We've talked about using DIDs, we've talked about using something else, but we say, look, this is basically a generic string placeholder for doing identification. But two parties can still communicate, because they already know who they're talking to in the first place, right? The identifier problem seems to me to be, more of the discovery case of the future, whereas the case that we pitched both in the BOF as well as in the initial creation of the working group was, look, these two parties know who they're communicating with, right? Routers on the internet do this already. In fact, I run a lot of routers, and you specifically say, I need to talk to this IP address because it's this ASN for this network that exists on the other side. You know who it is you're talking to, and I think that's where SATP promised that they would start, and thus is probably where we should say. Now we do have to specify sort of what that placeholder should look like for the future, right? Is it a string? Is it a binary blob? I think that to a large extent is remains to be seen. My belief is that if we're using something like JSON or something like that to do the encoding, then it should probably just be a generic string we can fill in later and explain what it's for. This will be a placeholder where this identifier will go, allowing gateways to do more collaborative agreement upon what the negotiation is actually about, or something like that. One other thing to note is, as a reminder, there's a lot of people that are newer to the IETF in this group. The way documents progress is that we get to we come up with a document that we think is done and ready to be published, right? So that, and then what multiple people have said is a peer review really means we have to go through a couple of steps first. The working group itself has to say, this is done. This is your last chance to make any comments about it before we ask for it to be published. And so that is a working group last call, is what the name of it is. So And Claire and I will create it. Typically, it's 3 or 4 weeks long, and then the authors have to respond to any requirements, right? After that, we give it to the AESG and we say, hey, we need it to be published. And Paul will hand walk it through the AESG. That'll be discussed there. And there will be an IETF-wide last call where the entire IETF community is notified that there is an upcoming publication. Does anybody want to comment? And I guarantee we're going to get comments. And so that also will be like 3 to 4 weeks long and things like that. So, and then after that, it goes back through the AESG. They deliberate on it and things like that. So, and at any point during these steps, we can sort of revert back and say, oh, it turns out there's some important things. The working group really needs to think about it longer. And we'll do even sometimes another working loop last call if there was an extensive set of changes made. So hopefully that's a little clear. Göran?
The ruthless approach to scoping is very good, but I have a question. If we say, if we publish the protocol with identity as a generic, any string will do, and then later on we publish a draft with a certain format, say it's a DID or URN or whatever. Now, not all strings are URNs, and suddenly to do the security check or to be compliant, you cannot do generic strings anymore. So can we really leave it out of scope for now?
It is possible depending on how we do it. I mean, one way to do it is we could ask for we could use 2 identifiers, right? Where one is, here's the type, and that type will be assigned later. So the type could just be an integer that we register with IANA, and IANA would have a registration system saying, you know, in future specifications have to say, you have to say the type of the identifier you're going to use as a second piece. And honestly, considering the number of ways that this group has talked about creating identifiers, this actually seems like a reasonable approach, right? Is it going to be a URN? Is it going to be a DID? And that type, you know, would be, say, 1 would be a DID, 2 would be a URN, 3 would be a binary blob for blockchains, 4 would be whatever, so that you have a type and a value that are independent of another. And then we can create an IANA registry, and I can help with that in the future of you know, how we do that in a document saying, and in the beginning, there may be, you know, no types assigned in the initial registry, or more likely, we would actually have one of the things that we can frequently do in that case is create a private, reserved for private use value, so that we can say, look, value, typically use something at the end of the range. So if we ask for a 32, you know, bit identifier, we'd ask for, you know, a range of identifiers at the end that is a set of numbers that are assigned for private use, where 2 different agreeing parties could agree that that first value in that range is something that they know, right? That doesn't have to be standardized. So that's one way forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, although I'm worried that this eventually would reduce interoperability. But yeah, it's a discussion we need to have.
Yeah, and we don't need to solve it today, but I think your point is very valid that we need to make sure that something can happen. Future specifications are allowed to, you know, add additions to this one. So one of the things that we can do is, for interoperability, a common thing that the IETF does is they mandate, this is the one that everybody has to support. The other ones are optional, or that maybe even sometimes a couple of them, but it's very common in the IETF to say, we recognize there's 3 different forms of identification that we're proposing. Number 1 is the one that everybody has to do. The other, you know, 2 are optional. And that's done all the time for things like that. Or sometimes even for security protocols, we often say these 3 algorithms are mandatory to implement, for example.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So Claire, was that enough discussion for your question?
Yes, and it's good to hear that apart from what's known, there's not much else to pick up which is good, because like you say, we'll get a lot of comments, so that'll steer us in the right direction.
Okay. All right, so where does that leave us for the day? There's still a half an hour left. Is there anybody that wants, any of the authors of the current document specifically, that want to bring up a discussion topic about, something especially on that remaining checklist for things to get done that they want feedback on? Rama?
Rama, you're on mute, I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have a question or feedback right now, but just wanted to note that Victor Zainan, who's on the call, he submitted a use case, which he had also mentioned in the last IETF meeting where he was present. I still need to incorporate that in the main draft. Just haven't had the time to do so. I'll probably get some time next week, and after that we can next interim meeting we can, or maybe even earlier, we can close it out. I don't know if Victor wanted to talk about that use case now. Do you?
Thank you very much for that, Rama. I did actually mean to remember that and and forgot. That is definitely something that the working group needs to decide of whether it's in the initial scope of the use case. So yeah, talking about it now would be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. This is Zainan Victor, and thank you for bringing this up. I shared a doc, a section draft for the group to see if this fits the initial scope. I can paste the link here. So very quickly, the goal is to ask if DNS NFT ownership transfer would be something that SATP is interested in considering including as a targeted use case. The reason being that it seems there's no current good way to specify it, and the closest standard is the EPP, also by IETF, and it's a very natural digital assets as if we see that ownership of DNS. So I pasted the NFT ownership transfer doc here. Like to get feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think maybe we should include that as a specific topic next time after people have read the document completely, so that we can consider it. I will say that for transfer of assets that are in existing protocols like the DNS that already have solution spaces that are defined within the registry registrar model and things like that, that would be very hard to get past, right? Because you're asking for an alternate mechanism that could conflict with the current mechanisms. If we're talking about names that are within the existing DNS framework, if you're talking about NFT or other related names that might exist under the future.alt specification or things like that, then that's out of scope of the existing specification. So we could run into political troubles there, but we can work through that. I would say for now, we should probably defer the discussion until we make sure everybody has read it. And I'm not sure everybody here today has. But we should include all use cases that we think do fall within the scope of what SATP can promise, at least especially in round one.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for the great feedback. Just one note, I think this is not intended to be an alternative to EPP, but rather a complement of the EPP in the case that the registrars wanted to use, or registries wants to use blockchain as their internal ledger. That I see as a good opportunity for staff to kind of help coordinate a transfer to make sure that within the ledger it's presented correctly or smoothly. And it could be a good complement to EPP in my mind. But yeah, thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, anything that complements the existing system is always a good thing. I would just be very clear in the spelling out. And apologies, I read your document a couple of weeks ago. I just got back from a meeting and I'm jet lagged. Anything that complements the existing system is good. I'd be very careful in when that use case is written up to very clearly articulate, you know, what the situation looks like, right? You have this part of the DNS tree that is registered, you know, uses traditional DNS resolvers because otherwise it's not the DNS. But the ownership of it is controlled by a blockchain-based registration system, and they want to transfer it to this other blockchain-based registration system under the same namespace that is, you know, a different type of registrar, for example, that's handling it.
Yes.
You have to be careful.
I'll update the doc. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. So why don't we, Claire specifically, why don't we put that on the agenda for next time as an explicit thing that we should discuss in October? Did we create meetings for October yet?
I think October's our last one.
Okay. Well, it's good that there's another one, but we should figure out beyond that. We should probably create the rest for November.
Before we create any more, I want to check that this time slot works for everyone. I know we've got quite a few people from around the globe.
That's a good point. We should do that on the mailing list because otherwise we're only asking the people that are actually here.
Exactly. That's why I do. It's on my list of things to do.
Okay, great. And that brings us back to what else do we want to talk about today to help move the documents forward?
Quick note, folks, if you want to comment on architecture document, you could easily open an issue thing on the GitHub repo. Thank you again to Yara who set this up. It really makes a big difference and you can now look at diffs between versions of drafts, and Raphael is in the process of setting up the same thing. So on the repo you'll see the editor's working copy, and then you'll see a pointer to the current formal IETF version that's up on the data tracker.
Has everyone, just as a regular reminder for everyone to stay up to date with the documents, as that's the core kind of focus of our efforts at the moment. Obviously, once the protocols move forward, we can start to pull in some of the out of scope or expand the scope, extend the scope for future work. Okay then, if nothing more to cover off, shall we call it a day?
I guess this is last call for any other business.
Yep.
Going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. Okay.
I think we've got signing out on the chat, so let's call that.
We have liftoff.
So, Martin came in at -2, so I guess you go for it.
No, I had problems setting up the thing here. But it's okay. Thank you.
All right. Cheers, folks. See you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Oh, bye.
Bye, drummer.
Lovely.
Oh, just.
Oh, so nice. Can we stay a bit to watch him?
Live stream puppies.
Does he code yet? Does he know how to code yet, Paul? Are you working on that?
To be confirmed.
Well, it's
It's a
technically
very
not
simple
on
abstraction test, but no coding.
Drummer's been to 2 or 3 IETFs at this point, I think, too.
No, just one.
No, he was in Philadelphia, and I thought he brought him to London, didn't you?
No, just Philadelphia.
Just Philadelphia? Okay.
But she should go back to one. I agree, but it's a bit hard. Maybe when I'm not AD, I can give her some more time.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Naomi has to come with you. I mean, that's the key. But Vancouver's not that far away.
Oh yeah, Vancouver we could maybe do. Although it's a long flight for us.
Yeah.
Shorter than Prague.
No. No.
Definitely shorter than Prague.
Is it 5 hours? So. Okay. Anyway. Bye
All right.
bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.